Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. It's great to be with you again. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amy Refaat. I am a private sector specialist with the IFC on the Global Employability Program, VTI, and I will be moderating this session. Today we have a great topic lined up for you: how to leverage data to advance your graduates' employability. Higher education institutions have access to a treasure trove of data on their students and graduates. They have institutional or internal data, such as basic demographics and first-year retention rates. And they also have statistics they collect from their graduates on employment. Institutions that study this data have a much greater potential to improve the career outcomes for their students. And as we know, this is what our audience today on the webinar cares about the most: their students getting a good job once they graduate. The question is, how should educators sift through and prioritize the data they have and collect? Because collecting data requires resources, as I'm sure all of you know. What kind of data can educators use besides information collected from their students about employment outcomes? And what valuable decisions can be made based on this analysis regarding the programs on offer, the curricula, the way the institution even reaches out to potential students? In this webinar, we're going to dig deeper on these critical issues through sharing the experience of two experts in the field representing reputable institutions that are taking a data-driven approach to impact the employability of their graduates. We have selected our speakers to represent different global locations and also different perspectives or units from within the university or college. Now, I am delighted to introduce you to our speakers. We have Dr. Joy McKinnon, with over 30 years of experience occupying the leadership positions of Vice President of Academia at Seneca College, Vice President of Business Development at Algonquin College, and Vice President of International and Applied Research at George Brown College, all based in Canada. Representing Britain, we have Lisa Mnoria, the Executive Director of Careers and Student Life at Imperial College Business School, based in London. Lisa has over 15 years of experience driving strategy within higher education and career services. I am sure you're going to have questions for our speakers, so we have a question and answer session during the second half of the webinar, and I would like to encourage you to send over your questions in the Q&A box, which is, by the way, different to the chat box, and you will find both icons at the bottom of your screen. And by the way, the Q&A box is not public, so only the panel and myself can see the questions. Before we move to our speakers, I would like to start by asking you, the audience, a question. Do you track the employment outcomes of your students? Yes, always. Yes, but only sometimes. Or no, you don't track them. I'll just give the audience a few seconds to respond to this. Ross, if the responses are ready, maybe we can go over them. Okay, so most of you do track employment outcomes of your students. Great. And most of you do it sometimes, not all the time. So I have a follow-up question for those of you that do track your students, whether always or sometimes. If you do, how do you use that information? Please choose all options that apply. Do you review and update program content and structure based on it? Do you revise program delivery model? Do you change applicant outreach? Do you increase employer outreach and engagement? Do you enhance learning supports for students? And do you actually drop and add courses based on the information you've collected? I'll give the audience a few seconds to respond. Okay, so if we have the responses to that, that would be great. Okay, wow. So I can see mostly to review and update your program content and also increase employer outreach. Okay, that's interesting to see how the audience utilizes their data. Now let's move to our speakers and see how they use data. Lisa, I would like to start with you. First, could you tell us about your role at Imperial College and how your institution approaches employability?
Yes, of course. Hi, Amy, and hi to everybody who's listening. It's great to be with you today. Look, I'm, as Amy said, based at Imperial College, and as you may know, Imperial College London is consistently ranked in the top 10 globally, universities globally, both by the Times Higher Education and the QS. And actually, we're delighted just to have been announced as the University of the Year by the Times Higher just this week. Imperial is a large institution. We have about 17,000 students and 8,000 staff. At Imperial College Business School, where I focused, the school is, relatively young, entrepreneurial. It launched in about 2003 and has grown really quickly in terms of the number of programs offered and also staff and student numbers. And very happy to say that we're also triple accredited. We have a large program portfolio with 18 degrees. We have about 1,800 master's students and over 600 MBA students studying with us part-time or full-time. And a number of our programs are ranked, for example, by the Financial Times. Our Masters in Finance, our Masters in Management typically get ranked in the top 10 by the FT. Now, as Executive Director for Careers and Student Life at the Business School, I essentially oversee all non-academic delivery or activity at the Business School, and employability is really important to us. We want to see students meeting their objectives. Essentially, most of our students take their programs because they're wanting to further their career. And we really care not just about their first job on graduation, but students' ongoing career progress as they move on to become alumni as well.
Right. So it's integral. Employability is integral to you as an institution. And I have a very basic question. Why do you collect data?
Yeah, it's a basic but a good question. I think I'd probably say, there are three key reasons for us to collect the data. The first is really for us to understand student outcomes. We can't understand the outcomes unless we're collecting the data. It enables us to benchmark against peer programs, for example, and provides an understanding of the current recruitment market, which can then impact our future careers support and provision. The second is that data really supports internal reporting and also program review. So it helps us to identify success and also to decide where to make interventions, if you want. And then thirdly, data underpins activities that promote the visibility and the success of the school's program. So by that, I mean ranking submissions, accreditations, but also promotion and marketing of programs. So, demonstrating the ROI, the return on investment for applicants is really important too.
And in order to do that, what data exactly do you collect and how do you analyze it?
So look, we collect data on a range of areas. The percentage of students that are employed, when they accepted their offer, what percentage have started up their own company, have become entrepreneurs, which industry have they gone to work in, which region or country are they in, and also salaries as well are important for us to consider. And then we'll analyze that in a variety of ways. We definitely analyze that by program. And when we're analyzing and reporting, we adhere to MBA, CSEA reporting standards. And we aim for a minimum of 85% data on each of the individual cohorts of the various programs. We'll also analyze by region to see if there are regional differences in the program outcome, in the student outcomes, and also by industry sectors as well. So quite a range.
Quite a range, yes. And obviously you would be the first to know that data collection is very time and resource intensive. So how do you decide where to focus when collecting that data?
I mean, it's a great question. It is hugely time and resource intensive, and my team is responsible for both collecting and reporting on the information. Now, I would say that I'm conscious that I'm talking more about kind of our postgrad students that we have at the business school, and actually the way in which undergraduate outcomes are reported can be quite different. So for example, in the UK, that's done and organised by the government and is part of an annual governmental survey that's done in conjunction with the university. In terms of the postgrad and business school programs, we'll consider things like whether or not this program is ranked or non-ranked. So where a program is ranked, we'll need to report certain specific data and criteria, for example, to the FT or to Bloomberg Business Week, whatever it might be. There are specific data that we have to collect and we have to report on. So we'll prioritize making sure we have all of that. We'll gather more information, therefore, for ranked programs than we would for non-ranked. So for example, salaries, we make sure we collect very significant amounts of detail and data points for salaries for ranked programs, because we know we have to report on it, whereas for non-ranked programs we won't collect that. So I think that tends to be the way that we look at how we focus our resources.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for sharing that. It's very some really good information there in a short period of time. Let me move to Joy at this point to get some insights from a different system, and also from someone that has made decisions on a different range of programs. So first, Joy, could you tell us about your approach to employability? You're on mute, by the way, Joy.
I promise that's the only time that's going to happen. Thank you, Amy, and good day, everyone. My approach to employability begins with identifying the skill and experience requirements of employers, and then working with industry networks to develop and deliver programs to meet these needs. Employers are interested in supporting programs that prepare students with the discipline-specific skills required to be immediately effective on the job, but also the essential employability skills, including communications, critical thinking, problem solving, and interpersonal skills required to be able to learn on the job, perform effectively on a team, and assume a leadership role when required.
That's okay. That's great. So starting with the employer.
Starting with the employer.
And in your multiple roles, I know you've looked at data from different sources in order to make decisions about different programs. And obviously, one important source of data is tracking employment through reaching out to graduates and asking them the question, which Lisa was mainly talking about. But could you also tell us what other kind of data an institution can use?
Certainly. I look at data primarily from three sources: employers and employer networks, including industry associations and labor organizations; general economic data, including labor market and employment data. And Lisa, I think you referenced a number of these data points as well. And institutional data, including applicant demand for programs, student satisfaction, student retention and graduation rates, student academic performance. I also
Mhm.
examine secondary school data, especially grades for incoming students from predictor courses like, for example, communications and mathematics.
Right, and on this last one, institutional information, this is information that an institution already has. Could you tell us a bit more about how you would use that information to make a decision, or at least as an initial alarm bell? An example, perhaps?
I certainly can. Amy, I'd like to give you two examples, if that works for you. In the
Great.
first example, this was a 3-year advanced diploma in a business technology discipline. The first alarm bell was a very low graduation rate for the program and high student attrition between first and second semester and between first year and second year. We did a deep dive into the institutional data, and what we found was the following. A large percentage of students had received very low grades or had failed in the same first semester courses. The program had an unusually large number of teaching contact hours or course delivery hours in the first and second semester. The evaluation schemes in place for the first year courses tend to focus on lectures and tests along with examinations for the courses that had a high failure rate rather than more frequent in-process feedback. In fact, we discovered that in these high failure courses, in many cases, the students had received no feedback at the midpoint of the semester. So they really didn't know how they were doing. We also discovered that some faculty were very focused on lecture delivery. That was their preference. And they had provided very little opportunity for students to meet with them outside of class for extra help. To address these concerns, I worked with the academic team to reduce the number of teaching contact hours in the first 2 semesters and to ensure that the faculty teaching these critically important first semester courses were very engaging and they were very focused on supporting students as they made the transition into the post-secondary learning environment. In the second example, which was a long-standing, long-established college technology program, the program had attracted only 12 applicants for the September fall intake year. To decide on the options for this program, I brought together the faculty team and we looked at the program's enrollment history, student feedback and graduation rate. We looked at employer information and industry information on employment trends in this discipline. And we received that information from the program advisory committees. We also did a search of job openings for graduates with this type of background. At the end of this deep review, what was determined was the program, both in terms of content and delivery, no longer met the needs of students, applicants, employers, or the labor market. And the college actually decided to suspend delivery of the program and replace it with a program that was a better fit for contemporary needs.
Wow, those are two really like amazing examples of how you can use information to turn something around. So with the first example, I mean, that's amazing. You were able to turn around a program that was receiving very negative feedback, students were failing, into positive feedback from students just by looking at the data that you already have and switching professors around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's right.
okay, wow. And I'm sure the professors that you switched around didn't even want to be there in the first place, teaching freshmen.
Actually, you're right. The professors that we moved to the higher level semesters were quite delighted that they were getting more advanced level students in their courses.
Yeah, they want the tougher ones.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
wow. And then on this other example, you said that you collected information from the market to identify the problem. Why you only had 12 applicants. How did you collect that data? Where was it? Where were you getting it from?
Most of the data was collected through desk research, through the existing college student information system. I would say the majority of the data came from that. We also reached out to employers through college departments that worked regularly with employers and the community. The faculty reviewed the course outlines and the student workload in the courses that had a high failure rate. And that was very important because actively engaging the faculty helped them to see where the need was to enhance the program content and delivery to be able to promote student success.
Right, so you used the faculty themselves to identify this. So that's amazing because the end result was a decision to close that program. And in a case like that, what do you do? And that must have been I can imagine, a really difficult decision. What do you do with the faculty members?
So that's a great question. Colleges have a process in place to be able to address faculty displacement in the event of a program closure. Often faculty have to stay on for a while anyway, because every college is required to have a teach-out plan when they close a program to enable currently enrolled students to be able to complete their program of study within a specific time frame. So the faculty will stay involved until that happens. Colleges make every effort to try to place faculty in their course discipline in other programs across the institution. So they make that effort. In many cases, it is necessary to look at whether very experienced faculty could be helped to transition into retirement if that's an option for them.
But that's an amazing tip, to actually include the staff in identifying the problem so they can actually see it. Thank you for sharing those with us, Joy. Let me here move back to Lisa on to ask you the similar question on how the data and analysis you conduct is actually then reflected in the various programs. How does the program change, if at all?
Yeah, good question. So we will, I will meet on an annual basis with the program leadership team, particularly with the academic program directors, to highlight kind of key points that we're seeing or key trends we're seeing coming out of that year's employment outcomes data, for example. And we'll particularly kind of discuss and look for explanations for any particularly unusual findings that we may have noticed that year. So to look to see whether it's relevant to, I don't know, maybe just that particular cohort. Is it related to something to do with who we've admitted into the program, or maybe to see what's been going on in the market? Has something impacted a particular sector, or, for example, in the past year, what's the impact of the global pandemic been? So we'll be looking at that, and at the same time, we'd also be looking at and exploring, I guess, more the external market to better understand some of the employment trends. So if we, saw some unusual outcomes, we would maybe be looking at, are our employers that we engage with, are they recruiting the same number, or have they reduced the number of hires they're making? And if so, why would that be? And we'll be talking to employers on a regular basis, but certainly as part of our annual planning around, checking in with them to understand the skills that they're seeking, the needs that they have for hiring, and taking that back as part of the conversation with the academic directors and wider program team to see, how does that information impact on what needs to be delivered on the programs to ensure that they're cutting edge, and to ensure that students really are graduating with the skills that employers are seeking to recruit.
Right. Okay. So in that case, what happens if or when you discover one of your programs has a low employment outcome? Is there a way to then use that data to improve the program? Like, how do you go about a decision like that?
So, I mean, if there's a program that is showing, for example, kind of low employment, we would, I guess, maybe dig deeper in three ways. So the first would be to be working in partnership with our marketing, recruitment and admissions teams. And we work very closely together with them anyway. But we'd be digging deeper to see really who'd been admitted onto the programs, and to see if there are any trends in terms of backgrounds of students on the programs and then related outcomes. We'd be working with the academic team, as I mentioned just now, to review the academic program, to really hone in on what's being taught and what's the students' academic performance, and to see if there are any insights that kind of play out through digging deeper into that. And then thirdly, we would really, of course, be considering what and how we're supporting in careers. So, you know, the professional development, employer engagement, is there anything that we need to be doing differently in terms of how we're working and the activities we're supporting and delivering, to, you know, whether that's gaining the employer feedback, identifying students' skills gap and so on, to make sure that we're kind of filling that gap there.
Okay, so looking at admissions, the academic performance, career services, and employer feedback. On the admissions one, what happens if you find out students coming in from a certain region or country are performing badly or just not getting jobs?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think the first thing would be to really hone in on what data you're observing that based on. You know, are you just looking at 1 year's worth of data? Because that doesn't really identify a trend. You need to look at multiple years worth of data to make sure there's not just some, you know, I don't know, some random blip that year, for example. I think, you know, we talked about, you know, I talked just now about liaising with marketing, recruitment and admissions and looking at some of their data. One of the activities that we've carried out on a few of our programs now has been to compile the data together from a variety of different teams. So pulling out the data that the admissions team hold on student backgrounds, for example, looking at how students have performed on their program, student engagement on their program, and then looking at careers outcomes, and where possible, alumni career progression, and then starting to look in to see, are there any trends that we're seeing coming out across that piece there. I think the other thing that we need to consider in terms of admissions, for example, is things like the equivalency of international degrees. That's something, you know, that is discussed and agreed by Imperial, the wider university registry. And sometimes actually at the business school we'll push back and disagree, and get some different exemptions, for example, there. And then also to bear in mind that, you know, regionally, if we're looking at student outcomes, recruitment timelines, and by that I mean company hiring timelines, tend to be different in different regions. So for example, in the UK, the autumn or the fall period, as some people call it, is a really, really busy recruitment season. Whereas in APAC, for example, particularly mainland China, we much more see that being in the spring period. So taking some of these regional differences into account is important. And then lastly, I would just make the point that, you know, we really need to be mindful of EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion. You know, we need to find a balance between optimizing outcomes and balancing and supporting diversity and inclusion on our programs. You know, when we're considering the data, we need to be mindful of some of these other areas at the same time.
Yes, that is a really important point, I think, for many educators and for many of our audience, because many of them have international students or are embarking on internationalization. So thanks for sharing that. You also mentioned that you look at external conditions and you have conversations with particular hiring companies. So I'm curious, and I'm sure the audience is too, to ask, recently, have you had insights about market needs post-COVID-19 and what you're doing with that information to help your students? No, that's a tough one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, our employer relations team has been doing a brilliant job of engaging with our corporate partners to really kind of, you know, sense check and temperature check the market. We're certainly seeing some happily, particularly in the UK, you know, if I'm talking about the UK market, seeing, you know, some real increases in the grad recruitment market now, which is a relief. You know, we just held our virtual recruitment fair this week and we had 55 companies joining us, which was up from 30 something last year when we were holding a similar fair. So we're definitely seeing that be in a much stronger place. And I think also we're seeing a lot of, you know, and this is what we're saying to the students, we're seeing a lot of new opportunities coming through. So our teams are organized along industry sector lines, and each industry sector team has created webinars to really update the students on what's going on in that particular industry, what they can expect, where some of the opportunities and the challenges lie. You know, and we're talking to employers, we're certainly hearing some of the, you know, changing skills, I guess, that employers are starting to look for in students, given some of the current circumstances that have been taking place. And, you know, I suppose kind of there are four key skills really that I would say they're particularly looking for. The first would be, you know, and Joy touched on some of these when she was talking earlier. I think the first would be around communications. And I think whereas historically that would have been very much face-to-face engagement, companies are now very much looking for students who are much more all-rounded communicators and are very competent and comfortable in engaging online and virtually, as well, obviously, as face-to-face. I think the importance of technological competency has really skyrocketed in the past year. That was a trend we were starting to see, and that's obviously really been enhanced and driven by the pandemic. And that's being familiar and comfortable with, you know, things like Zoom, Teams, you know, working with, you know, I guess hybrid teams and team members and project teams who might be working and engaging in a variety of locations, or it may be things like modeling and coding skills as well. And the third is really around leadership skills in that tech-driven world. So we're seeing the importance of technology coming through, but how do you lead when technology becomes more and more important? And then the fourth is that really we're starting to see more and more employers looking for students to really demonstrate adaptability. You know, that adaptability, given the VUCA world that we're currently in, you know, it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, ambiguous. You know, how are students able to demonstrate their adaptability in those times? And, you know, we were talking earlier about how we bring that then back to the programs. How do we ensure that our students can develop those skills? You know, whether we're incorporating those into, you know, the academic learning, experiential opportunities through presentations and group work, through maybe the academic curriculum, you know, maybe their leadership module, or whether it's through careers in supporting them with their communications.
Wow, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, do I fit into this new world? I like the VUCA example too. Yes, I'm trying to see if I can do all these things. So on that topic of engaging industry, I'd like to move back to you, Joy, because you brought that up in the very beginning as one of the ways you approach employability. How is this relationship with employers and industry developed in your experience? Because you mentioned the importance of gathering information from them.
It's critically important to work with industry to understand what their hiring requirements are, what their progression requirements are, and to understand their competitive environment, everything that Lisa just touched on. The way I recommend that a college begin and continue its relationship with industry is by thinking of the college as a member of the industry sector in which the employer is engaged. So the college actually plays a role within that industry network as a supplier of education and training to that industry. So it belongs at the table in that industry network. And then it's able to understand where the industry is going, what its needs are, and it's able to develop many contacts within the industry. So with that in mind, I've always encouraged my academic teams to work closely with employers, to join industry associations, to offer to serve on education and training committees, and participate in conferences and events. And I have to say, in my experience, most industry sectors are very welcoming to colleges to play that role. In fact, they're eager to have that information. By building that strong relationship with industry partners, colleges can ensure continuous feedback on their programs and services. They can also identify early opportunities for work integrated learning experiences and employment for their students and graduates. And in some cases, they can go further to even identify opportunities for industry to contribute resources like instructional equipment and other kinds of resources that are required to support programs.
Wow, okay, so that's really good advice on how to get closer to industry. And I know this is really, really relevant to our audience. This is one thing many of our clients struggle with. They talk about how it's difficult. So I really like that, that piece of information or that advice on creating this two-way relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just asking them to come sit on the committee, which is probably viewed as a waste of time for them, but it's more of, okay, we can also contribute to your conferences, to come in and listen to you, so we can bring that. Right, that's great. At this point, I'd actually like to shift gears here with you, Joy. And this is a bit of a tough question that we've had internally, and it's been posed about, as we talk about the importance of employability and the importance to linking to industry. Because with some programs, especially the humanities and social science programs, we think they should have a place at universities, obviously, and colleges, even if they're not supported with funding from industry, because they have an educational and a cultural role. How do you retain funding for programs like that might not be high in demand from an industry, and also don't have many students applying something like philosophy? Even though there's an educational role, and we don't, but they need to achieve on employability as well, indicators. So I'm hoping you're given your experience, you'll be able to help us with this tough question and point that we debate internally.
This is a tough question, and it's a perennial one, especially when funding is tight, and it always seems to be tight. Canadian colleges are mandated to prepare students for employment, so they don't deliver programs in areas like philosophy, for example, but they do deliver preparatory programs that tend to focus on liberal science areas of studies. And these programs are designed to help students build stronger academic and interdisciplinary skills before they choose a specific career path. So while it's often very difficult to build a case to maintain funding for these programs when the college is undergoing a massive program review, there is a strong argument for their continued delivery based on the positive role of these programs in supporting student retention, and also in preparing students with the essential employability skills that employers want. And Lisa and I mentioned those earlier: communication skills, interpersonal skills, etc. So it may be surprising, but often employers will support retaining these programs because they see that students may take one of these programs and then go on and complete a graduate level program that's in a discipline area, making them a much stronger candidate for employment.
Oh, okay, that's a really interesting perspective. So you're saying that industry see the value of these students because these are the students that actually have these skills Lisa was talking about: communication, leadership, and adaptability. Okay, thank you for that. That's a really good way of seeing it and responding to this problem of how do you balance those two. Before we move into the Q&A, I'd just like to ask you one final question and a piece of advice, Joy, for the student, for our audience, sorry, regarding this use of institutional data that you mostly talked about and data collected from students post-graduation, which Lisa mostly talked about. Clearly, you need both. But what would your advice be to balance between them, especially if you're a public institution with limited resources to go out and collect information?
Yes, if you're a public institution with limited resources, I would recommend beginning with a deep review of institutional data and using that review to identify the specific key performance indicator surveys that would be the most useful. I would encourage all public institutions to use a student feedback questionnaire at the course level to gather their students' perception of the content and delivery of their courses on a regular basis. More formal KPI surveys, such as those used to assess student, graduate, and employer feedback, are very useful in benchmarking institutions against their peers, and Lisa talked about this. However, these surveys require a significant investment, both in terms of a financial investment and also in terms of time. And often the delivery cycle for these surveys doesn't fit very well with institutions that may need to make program decisions very quickly. Finally, the response rate on some KPI surveys, particularly those that involve graduates and employers, often the response rate is very low because these populations tend to be quite mobile and it's often difficult to reach them to be able to get their feedback. So I would really recommend public institutions start with looking at the data they already have at their disposal, their institutional data.
Right, yes, and as we've seen from your examples, you can do amazing stuff with that. You can turn a program around. Okay, thank you for that. So it's time for our Q&A session. We have a few questions here. Let me just pull them up. I can see there is one for Felisa. I'm finding it difficult to put it up. There it is. Don't know, I wouldn't know how to answer this one, but from Hugh, that you talked about non-technical skills, and how would you measure these skills? If you were to decide that I would imagine if you're trying to decide that whether your students have them or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I can certainly answer, and I'd be love to hear what Joy might add to this one as well. I think it depends about what skills it is that we're talking about. You know, when we're talking about some of the soft skills, I'd actually like the term soft skills, but we'll call it because everyone understands what we mean by that. And I think there's a variety of ways. I think, you know, for example, if you're talking about communications, there are different ways to assess that. Now, it may be that you do that through group projects. It may be that you do that through a presentation as part of the academic coursework, for example, or maybe it's that through careers you issue the students with a challenge that they have to complete. So for example, for some of our MBAs, we do a development center with them, and we put them into small groups, and they have to work together as a team, and we'll give them feedback on how they've engaged and interacted. So I think there's a range of different ways that you can be measuring that. But the question is whether you want to do that formally, and whether you want to incorporate you know, that assessment into and embed that and incorporate that into the academic content and the marking framework, or whether you want that to be an additional, you know, or a separate part that the students get feedback on. And different people, there are pros and cons of both. Let's put it that way. I don't know, Joy, have you seen some other examples or others that you'd suggest?
I think that's certainly a great starting point, Lisa. I agree with you 100%. And I would just go further to say that it is difficult to assess these skills, but in using projects, applied research would be a good example, teamwork, group work, service learning, work integrated learning, in which the students work with each other and with an employer or with an external community organization. If we can also build in different forms of feedback mechanisms, so students are evaluating each other, their peers in the group, they're getting feedback from the employers or the community or organizations that they're working with, that helps to round out the assessment of these non-technical skills.
I think that's a really important point, Joy. I think that peer-to-peer feedback can actually be really valuable. It doesn't always need to be a formal assessment, but just building it into the framework and the mechanism to give the students the opportunity to hear feedback. We often don't know what we don't know unless someone shares it with us. I think that's a really valuable point.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful also in giving our educators in the audience here tangible ways of incorporating that, because what we've seen with many educators, especially in emerging markets, reluctance on the side of the faculty to change this. So if you tell them to go evaluate their presentation skills, they're not quite sure how to do that. But maybe doing it informally and asking their peers to give feedback. That's a good way of getting started. I really like that piece of advice. Thanks for that. So let's go to another question we have here. Have you detected gender differences between employability outcomes? And is this something you look at as well? So I'll start with you, Lisa, because I know you've been looking at this kind of data recently, and then I'll move to Joy as well to see what experience she's had in the different colleges she's worked in.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question, and absolutely, it is something that we look at in the I guess, A, in the context of EDI, but also B, to ensure that we're supporting our students in the way that they're going to really benefit from it. So it is something we look at. You know, we noticed, for example, or in a while back when we were reviewing on one of our MBA programs, we noticed that our male students were we were starting to see a difference there in terms of the salaries our male students were reporting and the salaries our female students were reporting. And when we really dug into it, we were started to, by kind of chatting with some of the students who we knew, the MBA students have a dedicated careers consultant. And when the careers consultants were reaching out to those students, it became clear that those students hadn't felt comfortable negotiating as hard on their salary as some of their male counterparts. And so whereas we had been running sessions for the students around negotiation, we then added and introduced, in addition, a session specifically focused on gender difference in salary negotiation, and really got students in thinking about and kind of role playing out how they would go through some of that. And that wasn't just offered to the female students, you understand, that was offered to any students that could attend and participate. And we had really strong uptake of that session, and they found it really useful. We saw some significant improvements moving forward from that. I think it is really important to understand that. I think it's also important to understand it kind of regionally and culturally as well. So for example, we see a difference in salaries, say in the APAC region. And we're in the process of doing some work. I'm just actually speaking with a member of our faculty who's really interested in how we can support cultural difference and how we can support confidence in some of our international students to be thinking about how they can really gain the best possible outcomes for themselves. And that's a piece of work that we're looking at doing, a piece of research with a member of faculty at the moment. So yeah, absolutely, I think it's something important for us to look at, but I think we shouldn't just be looking at that on the gender difference side. You know, there's a range of ways that we might want to cut the data. That's just one of them.
That's great. And can I say here that I want to sign up for that workshop?
I've sat in on it and it's fantastic. Honestly, it's really interesting. Yeah,
I can imagine, because even here at IFC we do internal things on gender differences, and it's amazing. Just hearing the piece of information helps you better, or cultural differences, as you were saying, helps you better understand where you're coming from and the things that you don't say or that you do say that you're unaware of. So thank you. So I was going to move to Joy, and please share your experience on this. Any gender differences you've seen, or cultural ones perhaps?
I've seen both gender differences and cultural differences, and I'm glad to say gender differences seem to be reducing in most sectors, but it still really relates to which industry sector you're entering into. Advanced technology, IT, seem to be fewer gender differences, and actually fewer cultural differences as well. But in some sectors, so I'll give an example of the construction sector. Gender differences were significant up until recently. And some of that was really, I think, based on a lack of familiarity of what women could do in this field, and the smaller number of women who were choosing to go into these occupations as a career path, partly because there weren't opportunities for them. So I can tell you that a long time ago, probably 25 years ago, I worked with industry and the trade unions to develop pre-apprenticeship programs for women in a number of skilled trades in construction, plumbing and electrical, for example, to help women get a bit of a leg up to see these career paths in construction. Because we worked with industry, they were very successful programs, and the women were hired, continued on to have great careers in the field, and now actually that particular sector is most anxious in Canada to attract women into its ranks at all levels. So in addition to the workshops around negotiations of salaries and things, I think helping women and also different cultural groups have pathways into programs that will help them overcome some of the barriers still is a very relevant approach to take.
Right, and it's, yeah, that's another really interesting way of seeing how industry can really change things just by engaging them. I'm just curious. So, when you first initiated this partnership with industry on attracting women, what was their reaction? Obviously, now this is a sexier topic, but what was the reaction you got? Positive, negative?
Some concern at the beginning, just basically to where they had come from. I mean, their concern in the construction industry was delivering a project on time, on budget. Would this be a distraction from that? However, I have to say that both the trade unions and the employers were very positive. And do you know why they were positive? They were missing half the workforce. They were missing half the labor force that they could be tapping into to supply them with skilled people. So because of that, they were very keen to be involved. And once we got going, there was no looking back. So now you see women in Canada very much employed in areas like construction management and project management in all aspects of construction. And companies are delighted with that direction.
Okay, excellent. Excellent to hear we're moving forward on that one. We have another question about looking at the divide, but this time it's not gender, it's online versus face-to-face programs. And the question is, if you look at those two, what are the difference between outcomes for both of those? And again, I'll start with you, Lisa, and then go back to Joy.
Sure. I'd say that the differences here lie more in who we see the profile of the student on those programs, I think is probably a better reflection. So particularly on the programs that we offer as fully online programs, which is an online Masters in Business Analytics, an online Masters in Marketing, Strategic Marketing, and a global online MBA program. We see that they typically have more experience behind them. They are typically working full-time, studying part-time. And so the types of career progression and the types of change that they're seeking will be quite different from the students who are, say on campus for a one-year full-time program. They will be looking for a very different type of move. So I think it's more a reflection of the differences of the profiles of the students rather than anything about the outcomes of what they might suggest. I would say that typically you're seeing those more experienced students wanting to either pivot their career or wanting to really accelerate their career. Whereas obviously for a one-year full-time master's student, they'll be looking to really kickstart their career. So you'll see that the employment outcomes play out differently, depending on the different profile of the students that we have on the programs.
And would it be safe then to say, given that profile of students that are doing the online ones, they're already in a career usually, and they're trying to pivot, that the outcomes is the employment outcome is probably faster and higher?
I wouldn't say faster. That's an interesting observation. So I think it depends on the length of the program. So, for example, the majority of our online programs are 2-year part-time programs. Obviously, if people are working full-time, they may have family or other commitments, so it's fitting around that. So if they've got 2 years, they typically will see, or we will typically see them taking the first year to really explore their options, to really build up their learning. And certainly within careers will be, building up their professional development, their self-awareness, and some of those areas, so that they're then in a really good place to kind of launch off in their second year. So we do see some change in the first year, but I would say typically we probably see more significant change starting to play out by the end of the first year into the second year.
Okay. And Joy, do you have any experience with that, especially with a different range of programs, not business-oriented ones?
Yes, pretty deep experience in this regard, actually. The Canadian colleges have extensive network around online learning. And in our experience, as Lisa has said, in most disciplines, particularly more the business disciplines, the students in the online offerings tend to be more mature students, often career changers or looking to go the next step in their careers. The outcomes would suggest, though, that students tend to be more Successful in those programs, though, when there is a synchronous component included. So the students can spend some time, albeit online, but together in a chat session or having a discussion session rather than just asynchronous online. For the students in the more applied programs, and most college programs are very applied, so there is a hands-on component. So you might think of paramedic as an example, or nursing, or engineering technology. The students have a hands-on component that's best done hands-on. So in many cases now, there is an online component of those programs. So 1 or 2 courses may be delivered online, but the students have to come into a lab or shop environment to actually demonstrate their skills and work with the technology and the instructional equipment, et cetera, and work in teams, because that's the environment that they're going to be going into. The one comment I would make, and it builds on what Lisa has said, is for students coming right out of secondary school, we have seen that it's very challenging for them when they go into a program that is primarily online, even if it's a hybrid program, because they need more support and they need more engagement with their fellow students.
That makes so much sense. I don't know how students are coping with this 100% online, like the bachelor degrees. I know that that would have been terrible for me. But yes, thank you. So I hope, Jaylan, we've answered both your questions. We have one more question, and it's about how you collect data about your graduates, because it's very challenging to engage them. And let me, based on this question, give some context, because this is actually what we're hearing and we see from many of our clients, a difficulty in getting the information from the students in this first place. They're simple questions. Have you got a job? And what is your salary? But how do you get through to them in the first place?
Is that one coming to me?
Okay, let's start with you on that one.
I mean, I think there's a lot of trial and error. The team has done some amazing work. You know, I think it's the key thing I would say is, who do those students know? Who have those students engaged with? Who has built up a relationship with those students, who then can reach out to them and is most likely to get a response? You know, of course, we start with surveys, and a certain proportion of students will complete those surveys. We also have some compulsory surveys, for example, a end of program project submission and so on. But in terms of the actual personalised outreach to students who haven't yet completed the survey, of whom we don't yet have information, we try to identify who, and that may be somebody within careers, or it may be someone within the program team, the academic program team, who's built up their relationship with that individual and can really, you know, more likely to get a response. We'll also do some calls. Sometimes people don't actually check their emails, or they've switched off their college account, or, you know, whatever it might be. So actually phoning often generates a response, and often when you phone, you'll go through to their home phone number, which often actually is their parents' phone number, and then their parents kind of crack the whip. Oh, sorry, my light is on some energy saving thing. So then the parents kind of hassle them until they've complete it, which is always helpful. The other thing we do is to, you know, depending on where your students are from, if you have a large proportion of students who are from a particular region or from, you know, internationally, is to consider what interactive tools are used in that region. So for example, for students in China, we use WeChat. We've set up multiple WeChat groups, and then we'll push out on WeChat, you know, reminders, have you done this? You know, how don't forget to engage. And the last thing I would say is that peer-to-peer encouragement. So use your student leaders, use your, you know, student representatives, and get them to encourage their peers, and remind students of why that information is important.
Right. Okay. Sounds good. I'll just check. Joy, did you have anything to add to that?
I would just concur with everything that Lisa has said. In our region, we have formal key performance indicator, graduate satisfaction, and graduate employment surveys. We do follow up on those surveys with telephone follow-up. I agree, Lisa, sometimes that using a home phone works if it engages parents, but cell phones are usually a little bit more effective in reaching the actual graduate. We do use social media, including, as you mentioned, WeChat and WhatsApp for the South Asian market in particular, encouraging students groups to provide feedback. The other vehicle that we use in some sectors is we go back to the industry association and ask them if they can reach out to their member companies and get feedback. And because those graduates are working in the sector and they pay dues often to the industry association, and it might be another avenue to reach them.
Okay. I think we've answered that question really well. Well, thank you both for sharing your information so generously. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up as our time is up. We've learned some really good points about why to collect data and how that can improve your programs and the employment of your students and what kind of data to use. So I just want to say to the speakers, Joy and Lisa, thank you so much for making the time to share your knowledge and experience. And thank you everyone for joining. I hope you have found the discussion interesting and useful. If you have any questions about IFC VTI program and how we might be able to help your institution on employability outcomes and digging deeper on the issue of data, please don't hesitate to contact us on the emails provided in the invite. And we're going to be sending out an email with the recording, and we hope you will be able to join us for our next webinar happening on the 6th of October. We're going to be talking about the future of career services. So thank you very much, everyone, and bye for now.